We are up to our 14th week in Sefer Yehoshua and perek Yud Daled, where things get really exciting. But before we start, I do want to take a moment to acknowledge the special sponsors today, Shelley and Barry, and also Lynn and Joel, as they mark the side-by-side yortzites, which is so unusual of their parents, of Ephraim ben Yaakov David HaKohen and Hen Shabbos Simcha. To the Grumet family or parents whose yortzites literally are side by side this week, which is a good reflection on the type of life that they lived, which was very much side by side, whether it was in the career or beyond the career in their second career, which was the time they spent together afterwards, as almost like a young married couple again, after having retired together and spending the time enjoying their presence. And it was very difficult to see the last little while through the sickness at the very end, but that was very much a minor blip compared to the amount of joy they spent together. And among the many things I learned, but was just the ability to be able to pick up and start again, like this, when you're hearing about how they did art together, and like the painting, and just like the fact that they were willing to just carry on exploring, and with Ephraim, Mr. Grumet's wonderful radiant smile, the shrewdness of Mrs. Grumet, and just how they're able to partner together through those last years, through their love of Tzion, through their love of family. There's just so much that we miss, and their neshamas should have an aliyah. Let us learn a little bit today. So if you remember, just to what we did last time, is we figured out that we did the division of the east bank of the Jordan, which was where Moshe Rabbeinu was doing the division. So Moshe Rabbeinu divided up the Reuven, Gad, and East Menashe. That was on the east bank of the Jordan. So now we're poised to do the division on the west bank of the Jordan, or Israel proper, as it's known. But the truth is that we don't even get there this chapter because there's an interjection. There's something that happens in the middle. Two things happen. We have the introduction, and then a minor episode of what I would say is a personal interruption that occurs in this whole experience. Let's start slowly. So the first paragraph of the perek tells us that now, on the west bank of the Jordan, Yehoshua and the Rosh Hashanah come forward, and look how it starts in Pasuk Beis. Bagoral, in the lottery, Banachal Asam, their inheritance, Kasher Tzivo Hashem Biyad Moshe, T'tishaz Hamatos L'chatzi Hamateh. So the West Bank was divided based on the lottery to 9.5 tribes. 1.5 tribes. Ki nosan Moshe nachalas shematos l'chatzi hamateh me'ever li'Yarden. But l'Leviim lo nasan nachala b'seicham. 2.5 tribes were accounted for on the East Bank. So on the West Bank we needed another 9.5 tribes. If you count 9.5 and 2.5, gives you 12 tribes. And that's what we have over here. And it describes that Yosef had 2 tribes, as well, and the Levium did not have a tribe as well. And that's the description. Now you're about to say, okay, so this is about to be the entrance into the land of Israel, but instead, before we get there, we have this very funny personal account, which happens in the middle. From Pasuk Vav till the end of the perek is really the story about one person, and that is Vayigshu b'nei Yehuda al Yehoshua. So the tribe of Yehuda approaches Yehoshua, and that's well put. We appreciate Yehuda being there, but Kalevs ben Yehoshua Kalevs stands up and speaks to Yehoshua, and he says, you remember what Moshe Rabbeinu said about me and you in the area of Kadesh. I was 40 years old when I was assigned as a spy to go into the land of Israel. And I responded based on what was in my heart. The rest of the spies, they melted the hearts of the nation of Israel. I followed God. And then he says, and Moshe gave me an oath. He said, the area that you walked in Israel will be your eternal inheritance. And now he says in Pasuk Yud, Hashem let me live for 45 years. From the time I received that promise, Asher alach Yisrael b'midbar v'ata hinei hayom anochi ben 85 shana. I'm 85 years old, and he goes on to say, I'm as healthy and as vibrant as I was then, and now I would like my Nachla. Which is his Nachla? He asks for the city of Hebron. So this is just south of Jerusalem. He asks for the Ir HaAvos as his inheritance. And Yehoshua, his old colleague and compatriot, blesses him, gives him the area of Hebron in Pasuk Gimel Yudalet, and that's why in Pasuk Yudalet it says, Al-Kain Osa Hebron leChalev ben Yefuneh k'nizi leNachala ad hayom hazeh. It became the ancestral territory of Kalev. Yan Hashem ilei acharei Hashem. Because of this, and the perek closes, V'shem Hebron nifnim Kiryas Arba. And it used to be that Hebron used to be called Kiryas Arba in the old days. Why? Because Ha'adam HaGadol ba'anakimhu. There used to be a giant who lived there. Okay? And there was 40 years of silence from war. So that's all we have is the perek. Okay? So we're poised, we have this introduction about we're about to divide the land. Before the division happens, there's a sort of a little bit interruption. Kalevs makes his presentation, Yehoshua responds to his presentation, and Hebron is his. It's a very strange thing, because we're about to talk about global national issues, and then we have a personal issue which comes in the middle. So let's take a step backwards first of all. So first question is just to start with this perek is as follows: is how many tribes are there that we're dividing among? So we're told very clearly the math is 12, right? Because it's 9.5 and then 2.5, right? As Yehoshua said, meaning 9.5 on the proper Israel, 2.5 on East Bank Jordan. So that you count that up, that turns into 12. The problem really is that actually there's 13, right? So just to clarify this point specifically, and you'll see different counts in different places. So for instance, just flip the page for a second. Just if you look at the different places. So as an example, on in the count of the Nesiim, when the princes make their dedication to the Mizbeach, we have a count over there of 12. But look at those 12. Who's missing from the count of the Nesiim in the end of Parshas Nasa? Who's missing? Levi is missing, right? We have all the tribes who are giving we'll call it the dedication on the 12 days of dedication in the Mishkan. And the tribe that's missing is Levi. And in fact, Rashi comments on this. The Midrash takes the opportunity to acknowledge that that's why the next parsha is immediately Ba'aloscha Es Haneros, that Levi or the priests are going to be in charge of lighting the candles because they didn't get a role in their dedication. But if you look at the Choshen as an example, there's 12 tribes, right? It's 3 by 4, and over there who's missing? Ephraim and Menashe, right? So over there we have Ephraim and Menashe which are missing, which is complicated, right? So how does this work? How is it that we have really 13 tribes and yet we always count 12? So it depends for what? That's what it seems to be. It goes back to Parshas Vayechi. In Parshas Vayechi, Yaakov Avinu takes his grandchildren, Ephraim and Menashe, and he makes this enigmatic statement where he says, Ki Ruvain v'Shimon yiyuli. They'll be like Ruvain and Shimon, essentially upping their status into a tribal status, not just grandchildren status. By the way, they had siblings, right? So Ephraim and Menashe did have siblings. They just counted as grandchildren, not tribes. So apparently he elevated their status to tribal level. And the question is why or on what basis did Yaakov Avinu have the capacity to even do that? You can't just suddenly make favorites induct them into your tribal allotment. And the answer is because he was utilizing a very unique law, and that is the law of Bechorah, of firstborn right. And that is, we know that the Torah proclaims that the firstborn gets a double portion in the inheritance. And you'll notice that of all the 12 tribes, no one gets a double portion. And so what happens is that Yaakov essentially is not inducting Ephraim and Menashe as much as he is doubling up Yosef, right? And why is he doing that? Because Yosef, on the one hand, is the firstborn to the wife he chose, right? Which is Rachel, right? So that what he's essentially saying is, this is my firstborn, right? Which is complicated because that goes back to all the pain of the previous 2 decades leading to this moment. So it's not so simple. But more than that, what he's also acknowledging is perhaps Reuven was deserving of a double portion, yet he forfeited that. And that's part of what Yaakov Avinu says in his blessing/curse at the end of his life, is Ruvain Pachaz Kamaim Al Tosar Ki Alis Mishkavecha is Chilalta Yitzu Yalai. When he's saying is I'm in a sense retracting your rights to the double portion, and I'm giving the rights to the double portion to your brother, who's the firstborn of my other wife. Right? Reuven was the firstborn biologically and the firstborn of Leah, and he's saying I'm passing that right to the firstborn of Rachel. Now, by the way, he did not get all firstborn rights, because there's another aspect of firstborn which Reuven also lost, and there is what's called Bechora, the firstborn right in terms of land, that's possessions. There's Malchus, kingship, that went to Yehuda, and then there's also priesthood, which went to Levi. So Leah's children did get two of the three. Two of the three were called crowns of leadership in the family. So Yehuda got kingship, Levi got priesthood, but in terms of land, Yosef, the firstborn from the other wife, got firstborn right, which is why when it comes to division of land, that suddenly Yosef blossoms into two. Then the question is, so then we should have 13. And the reason why we don't is because the Torah tells us a number of times that the legal tax system set up is to help support the spiritual leaders in society, the representatives of God, or representatives of the people to God, and they're called the Levium, and therefore they're not getting a nachla because they're not supposed to. They're going to be supported by the people, they're going to have cities, but they're not going to have their own territory, and therefore they are withdrawn from nachla as well. So when it comes to our division, we're dealing with 12, but the 12 is missing Levi because of his unique status as this messenger. And why is Yosef doubled? Because Yaakov Avinu pivoted from Reuven to Yosef. This is the background over here. Now, this leads us to the next question: so how do they divide the land? So it's whenever you see a pasuk in Yehoshua, this is why it's so beautiful, which says Kasher Tziva Hashem es Moshe, as God told Moses, we should be able to find that, right? Meaning, we should be able to verify where that is. So let's go back, because this is why it's so brilliant. Everything over here is a reflection of what happened. So if you go back to Parshas Pinchas, where it describes tribal allotment, Parshas Pinchas is at the end of the 40 years in the desert. So although for us, in our minds, it seems a long way back, for them, it's really not so long ago, right? It's just, about 7 years ago, but it's really just before the cusp of going into the land of Israel. We're told the following: here's the rules of inheritance. And help me, as we learn through this for a moment, to appreciate the problem. Okay, so we're looking at the source 2. This is over here on page 3. Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe lemor. Hashem spoke to Moses, saying, La'ele, to these, teichaleka aretz benachla b'mispar shemos. The names of the tribes are going to be divided. La'rav tarber nachlasai v'lemat tamit nachlasai. Ish lefi pekudav yutan nachlasai. It'll be given, the more plentiful will have more space. The less plentiful will have less space. That sounds very equitable, right? Meaning, say, like, if I was listening to that and I was in the audience, I would feel very good with that, because if our tribe is big, we'll have more, right? Then the next one says, but bagoral it'll be done by the lottery. Based on the names of their tribes. So it'll be based on the lottery system, whether it's a lot or a little. So did you catch the problem here for a second?
The first part doesn't
yeah, so the end was Bein Rav Bein Yamat, and Bagoral. Like, let's just go through the rules of lotteries again right now, right? So, the lottery is a completely randomized system where there's no pre-intended outcome. So you put and for all intents and purposes, if it needs to be fair, it needs to be equal portions, right? Because otherwise it's not a lottery, right? So it has to be all these equal lots and title deeds in the roster, and then you turn the big ball and they pick out one, and now we have a division. But if that's the case and it's Bein Rav Bein Yamat, then it can't work with the idea of La Rav Tarber Nachlasai but Tamet Nachlasai, because that doesn't. The two descriptions of division don't make sense. And in fact, if you just look at the actual picture of the division, so help with me for a second. Let's go to page 5. If you look at it, and again, nothing is exactly specific. You'll see various different versions of this. Look at the map for a second on page 5. Look at the division of the land. I don't know about you, without pulling out my ruler, right? it doesn't seem exactly equal, right? Meaning it does seem more in line with the first part of the mandate, which was Bilarav Tarbeh Nachlasai Velamat Tamit Nachlasai, that it's based on population, census of those tribes. Now, I will acknowledge that there is a very complicated piece here which we're not going to be touching today. And that is was the count ascertained based on Yotzei Mitzrayim or Boya Aretz? Meaning, when did you ascertain their numbers? Was it their numbers meaning the ratio of numbers at the time of leaving Egypt, or 40 years later at the Boya Aretz? That is a really large discussion which is had in the Gemara in Bava Basra and Tav Kuf Yud Zayin. We're not discussing that right now because it isn't as applicable right now to our immediate discussion. I'd like to separate that from our discussion. But at this point in time, how does this work? It sounds like it looks like the tribal allotments are very much unequal in terms of actual territorial space. So how does this work? And how does that work with the lottery, which seems to be, the lottery is blind to recipients? Yes, Lynn.
Maybe the lottery is a divine lottery, basically God saying this is how it's divided by numbers, and then he's going to do it on a divine basis to say, now no one can complain because the lottery is my divine lottery.
Right, so there has to be something of it, my just question on your theory, which I think is excellent, is so what did they put into the box? Meaning like before, so meaning how specific were the portions that they put in the box, meaning once the lottery happens? Right? Because there's room, so if it was equal, then that's no problem, unless it was more general. Yeah, what else?
I feel it makes complete sense.
Yeah.
It's almost like the way we do our legislative body. Based on population, you break up the whole country. Based on what you pick out, so now this guy's getting over there, so now give him a lot around it of all those pieces to make up his large area.
Okay, excellent. So let's explore that for just a second. So before further comments, I want to just this particular issue over here. This troubles the commentators for centuries and centuries and centuries.
That it was also based on the better land versus the.
Okay, good. So there's a few other factors which I was hiding. I'm sorry. Yes. Okay. So yeah, we'll take a few more comments then.
The lottery was for all 12 Shvatim, or
Good question. It sounds like it was only for West Bank. Because it was already divided based on the request of the previous tribes, and we saw that already the land was too big to host them, which is why Moshe Rabbeinu invited in a third tribe. And so there was other few comments. I'm sorry, Sharon, yeah.
Yeah, in sports, when they have a lottery, the odds of getting the draft picks, they put in more balls, let's say ping pong balls.
There you go.
In terms of the lottery. So they get more opportunity, percentage-wise, to get a higher percentage of land. You're
right, but follow that through for a second. So the earlier, the more opportunity. The problem is just, I guess, perhaps the assumption, which may be a mistaken assumption, is that everything, all the ping pong balls are going in this. I would have said that there's 9.5 ping pong balls going in, and there's 9.5, or let's make it even 10, right? For argument's sake, I would have said there'd be 10 ping pong balls, 10 recipients. So when you pull it out and you say, for argument's sake, Shimon or Yehuda, then there must be something. What is that something they're receiving? If that something is not equal, then how did that lottery work exactly?
But percentage-wise, the people that had more.
You're saying more portions.
They get more
ping pong balls.
More ping pong balls.
Okay,
they
excellent.
get more options.
Very interesting. I've never seen this, but that's a really fascinating idea. That's a really good idea. No, I need to do more research. That would be an excellent idea. Meaning say like this: is let's say that we have 100 units of population, right? It happens to be that Yehuda won't be getting 1/10 of it. He'll probably be getting 15% of that as opposed to 10. Excellent. They're very interesting. So, yes, very, very. You see, folks, we could figure this out right here. So I'll tell you two theories that are out there on the books. There are many. But I'll tell you two theories. I want to just pick up on where Fran was going for just a second. And that is fascinating. Here is a commentary made, and this is discussed in great depth both here in the book of Yehoshua, but also in the Gemara of Bava Basra, which talks about what's called the Chalukas Nach on Daf Kuf Yud Zayin and Kuf Chav Beis. There on Kuf Chav Beis, there's a commentary called the Shita Mekubetzes, which is a classic Rishon. And what his general methodology is he's Mekabetz. He brings together all of the earlier commentators he has access to. This is generally speaking in Jewish commentators. This is generally there's I would call a flux of how ideas are procured. There are people who have great suggestions, and then the people who collect those great suggestions afterwards and they put them together, right? So the Shita Mekubetzes is putting a lot of great ideas together. He quotes somebody called the Rav Avram Av Beis Din, and there's a few of them in history, but this is the Ravid who says the following, and he says, look, and he gives examples from France. I think it's just actually great because that's where he lived. So he's talking in France 1300 years ago, but listen to his language because I just think it's fascinating, and then let's appreciate this. Take a look at the very bottom of page 5 in source 4, and the period, in the last line he says, Nashiva Namar. He's asking the question, is surely all the section should be equal. If it's all equal, then it doesn't reflect the population growth, right? Nashiva Namar Kiloi Kasu B'Gorolas Kiyim Tuchumei HaMechazois. He's only writing the general boundaries of those areas. It says from this border and onwards is a particular group of things. He says Catalonia, Ploni, Ulahalon mitachas Provencia, Ploni Ulahalon mechos Lombardia. So he's using obviously local descriptions. So what he's saying is that what were the balls that were put into the lottery? Were not the final boundaries, they were the bottom boundaries, right? The general regional areas that were given. And therefore, the Malbim commenting on the Ravid in the Shitta Mukubetzes on the Mabasra says a phenomenal thing. So then he goes further and he says, Hine Tire Dato Kadas Amari, that's the Mari Kra, who was one of the early Rishonim. Shagorelo Hayarak Alatchumim, it was the general boundaries. Va'achar Sheyeda Ba'ezet Tchum Yikach HaShevet. After that was ascertained as to which tribe would get which edge by edge, then Chalak Yehoshua Rosh Havas Amatos Lefi Mispara Golgolos. Then they would say, well, look, let's look at the census. We can't, Yehuda is burgeoning, right? So yes, he's getting this area, but we need to expand the outer area, meaning they were only giving the general, we'll call boundaries and onwards. How much onwards? That was up to human division. So on the one hand, it's kind of like this balance between the divine voice and the human voice. Divine voice telling you the where, the human voice telling you how much of the where is the way it has to be, because otherwise, and I think, Frank, that's where you were going with this idea. There's another idea which I think is also important. Baz was mentioning this, and Shelley, I have to come back to you next week to find your model, which I think is phenomenal. And that is, and so Baz's observation, which I think is really incredible, is as follows: is that it's not fair to say that there were equal portions of land, because for the simple reason is not all land is the same, right? You can have desert land. You can have fertile. You have desert land in the south, right, and along the coast by the Dead Sea. You have fertile farmland along the coast, which they didn't have as much of because they had not conquered fully it. We are going to have the Galilee, which is very different to the mountains of Judea. Every part of the land has different agricultural value. And therefore the land was divided in size based on its usage, which means that areas which had high concentration of farmland were actually less space because their value was greater, which means that the balls that were put into the lottery were not actually the same territorial space. What the divine piece of this, who was talking about the divine piece over here? Lynn. So the divine piece of this is that God ensured that the bigger spaces went to bigger tribes, even though the value per foot was actually less to it. That was the way Rashi seems to understand it. And I believe that's what the Gemara actually says. So I think this is what, if you read the Gemara sensitively, I think this is what's being said. Flip back for me to the Gemara actually of Basra, which is on the bottom of page 3. The Gemara says, Ibailu Eretz Yisrael Shvatim iflug oidilma lekarkev gavri. Iflug, the Gemara itself was saying, was it based on census, man count, or was it based on tribe? And the Gemara goes on to say, Tashmai as a proof, Bein Rav, Bein Lamat, whether it's many or little, which sounds to be like it's tribal, not census per capita. Then it says, Oid Tanya, Asida Eretz Yisrael Yitzchalik l'shloisha shvatim shetzchila l'Yisrael ela l'shnei masar shvatim. In the future, there's going to be 13 tribes right now when you have 12, and now it describes the process. It was based on the value. One area, one region, one sayar, which is a measure of a field, in Yehuda is worth 5 in Galilee because of the difference of quality. And it was also divided by the lottery. There was also not just the lottery, but there was also the voice of God, which was coming through the Urim V'Tumim, through which was the lighting up of the breastplate. Okay, so how did it look? Elazar, who was the Kohen at the time, at the end of the desert period, Milubash Urim V'Tumim, wear the breastplate. Yehoshua v'kol Yisrael amdim lefonav, and Joshua and all of Israel would stand in front of him. This is referring to our time now. V'kalpi shel shvatim v'kalpi shel tchumim munachim lefonav, and he had all the boundaries and all the tribes in front of him. He says, "V'ha'ayam mechavein beruach hakodesh omer Zvulun ole tchum ako oleimos." So he would look into the Urim Tumim, and the Urim Tumim would say that the stone of Zvulun would light up, and then the words Akko, which is sort of the northern border over here, would light up. And then he'd place his hand into the lottery, and guess what? Akko and Zvulun would come together, right? So he'd say Zvulun, he'd pick up, and the boundary of Akko would come up as well. And so on, and it repeats this, which is fascinating, because then that means to say that the divine piece over here was matching the larger spaces, according to the way Rashi interprets this Gemara, with the larger tribes, and the smaller spaces with the smaller tribes, even though they were getting less in terms of actual agricultural benefit. So it's based on population, which means to say that, again, balancing the divine and the human in terms of this division, which is fascinating, which leads us to just a very fascinating observation, and that is that God even had the divine piece in here. Because he could have left us up completely to human faculty. He could have said, look, folks, make a council, a zoning council, right? And then all the cousins, no. And then what's going to happen is that you divided. But Hashem said, is that it's going to be that I want to have a element of it, because we know that the lottery is the ultimate experience of happenstance, where we don't have a word in it. Like, meaning, when you flip that coin at the beginning of the match, it's basically, right, everybody agrees with it because you have no say in it, right, because it completely happens. Hashem says, I want you to understand, I'm going to start working through this methodology now. Beforehand, it was miracles, it was manna, it was water, it was clouds. Now I'm going to be walking through the chance of the stock market going up and down. That's me. Right? So Hashem says, I'm going to have my hand in the way you're going to live this life as well. I think there's a very important element. You doing your part, but understand in your part, I'm having a very important word. And that's kind of the balance we live on a daily basis. We make decisions, and we think it's all us, but we know that a lot of the best things that happen to us in life were not exactly our choices. The choice happened at the right time, and we jumped into it. But like that's the balance of, I think, Goral and human, and that balance, I think Hashem is asking us to thread that needle right now in our way of living in the land, not just the way to divide the land. But nonetheless, there's a lot to think about this. Now, quick recap. How long does this conquest last again? So, we know 7 years. Remember that Josephus makes the mistake, because he misread these Pesukim, that what happened is Josephus thinks the conquest took 5 years, because if he was 40 at the time, of the beginning of the desert experience, and he's 85 now, that means there's 40 years of the desert and 5 years of conquest, and Josephus misread this because the Meraglim did not take place in the first year, it took place in the second year, which means there's only now really 45 years from that, means 7 years of conquest. Just interesting historical point, and that's what Rashi points out.
So that
now,
Kalevs is like that. Kalevs is estimating in a way. He said it was 40.
I don't know when his birthday was exactly. If that's what you're asking.
You guys go with the first year.
But yes, no, you're right. But it was really into the 7th year now. So this is when he's talking. Now, let's get back into the Kodesh story. Yes.
Just a quick question.
Yes.
Did Reuben and God have a divine selection
Nope.
in Israel before they
yes, good.
select,
Yes.
before they
Such a good
asked?
question. So it seems like nobody talks about this explicitly. Yehoshua doesn't talk about this explicitly, but it sounds like plan A would have been that there would be 12 allotments over here. But now God is moving with the flow. So the flow is now that there's less people in the pool, and therefore the land expansion is divided separately. Barry, yeah.
Any thoughts on dividing it based on which tribes were going to survive later on?
So that's a hard question.
Yehuda and Binyamin survived.
It's a hard question. You know that it gets into a little bit of a sticky issue, which is how much space does God give us? In like knowing that we're going to make choices, good and bad. So I wouldn't say in terms of the north and south. I think they equally had an opportunity to make good and bad decisions, and some of them made bad decisions. But the east, you might be able to say this, and that is that in the tours of military conquest, and when we get there, God willing, in Melachim, when Assyria, which is sort of around the very north, comes to their military tours, the first tour of duty they do is along the east. So the Eastern Empire is wiped out first, and you see the reticence of Moshe Rabbeinu to embrace that settlement. He's not so excited about the East Bank, whether for concerns of secession from the Union, right? That was a very big concern we're going to deal with, God willing, in a few chapters' time, or just in terms of, even the military, the borders to protect themselves as well. So that you do see. In terms of the north-south, less of an issue here, because right now the neighbors are not the neighbors they are going to be, plus 4 plus 800 years essentially, right? Or 600 years really for the northern kingdom. So, and I think that's fair because I think Hashem does give them full license to make good and bad decisions, and they made some really bad decisions. But that means that it wasn't predetermined. That's in this respect. However, let's jump a few steps further for a moment. Let's go back to Kalev over here. Kalev claims that God said to Moshe that he's going to get Hebron. I'm like, okay, let's look in the books, right? Meaning, can we figure out where this actually happened? Is this true? The answer is yes. You don't see it in Parshas Shlach explicitly. You see it in Parshas Devarim, when Moshe Rabbeinu 40 years later is recounting the Meraglim, and there he adds in a detail we didn't see in Parshas Shlach when Meraglim came up. Listen to what happens. Moshe Rabbeinu says in source 10 that Hashem got very angry. In the first two psukim, this entire generation is going to be wiped out. And the last pasuk, which in source 10 is Zulasi Kalev ben Yefuneh. Only Kalev ben Yefuneh is going to survive in this generation. Hu Yirena, he's going to see it, the land. V'lo yetaynos haaretz asher dorach bo, the land that he walked upon. V'levanav, and his children. So the land that he walked upon is going to be his. So you say, I don't know. If I read the Meraglim carefully, they walked everywhere. So if that's the rule, if the rule of conquest is like, out west in America, wherever, you just walked, is like becomes yours, like wherever your horse got to at the end of the day, in the gold rush, he walked a lot of places. So why specifically, was he submitting his Fitbit records, how did that work? So you go back and actually, with a sensitive reading of the text, you realize specifically what he was saying. Go back to the beginning of Parashat Shlach. It describes the tour of the Meraglim. It was a 40-day tour. And in source 11 it says, Vayalu Negev. They started in the south. Okay, so the nation is in the center. They started in Negev. And then it says, Vayavo ad Hebron. And he came until Hebron. And there was giants who lived around there. And it describes Hebron's history. You notice what changed there? It's no longer plural. Do you notice that? Vayalu. They entered in the south, and he went to Hebron. Now you can describe it perhaps, and you can dismiss it and say, no, it means them as a unit, but that is very strange, to change the way it's described in the pasuk, which is why Rashi says, he went to Hebron, because only he went to Hebron. Who's referred to? Kalev. Let's put all the dots together now, folks. Now we see the picture. Kalev comes along and says, I was promised the land I went to, meaning I alone went to, not everybody else. And when was that? That was over here, when he went to Hebron. Why? Rashi fills in the extra missing piece, quoting a medrash which says, is that you see, listen, when they went out, one of the Meraglim was given special treatment. He was given an extra letter in his name. Yehoshua used to be Hoshea. Yehoshua is given the extra yud because Moshe wanted to protect him, his special student from the Atzas Meraglim. What about Kalev? What about Kalev? Is he chopped liver? Did Moshe Rabbeinu not believe in him? Did he think he was good by himself? What was happening there? There was no yud added to Kalev's name. So the Medrash says that Kalev felt very vulnerable. He felt that he knew that this was not a good venture that was unfolding in front of him, and he didn't know where he would land. So what he did was he went to Hebron. Why did he go to Hebron? Because there the patriarchs were buried, and he prayed for his success at his mission, right? By the way, this is one of the sources for the idea of praying at the graves of tzaddikim. He prayed at the Kivrei Avos that he should succeed, which is why he was able to succeed, meaning he wasn't given success from Moshe, he prayed for success. And therefore the giving of the land wasn't just because, he has an inn and he wants to get the special zoning he was saying, I earned it. I specifically gained it from this place, which is why I asked this. The Radak adds a little bit of nuance over here. Is the end of that passage there in Parshas Shlach, it describes it. Who lived there? Yelidei Nach. There were very large people who lived in that area. And that could have been that the reason why the other tribes didn't come there is maybe perhaps they were less interested in the Kivrei Avos, but also could have been they were scared. It was a very dangerous mission. So he went there, which is why he says, I risked myself to daven so I should succeed, so I deserve this particular land as well. And that's what ends up happening as well. Now, let's go a little further. Why now? Why now? Out of all the times, they're about to divide the land, the drums are about to roll, and the people are about to march, and there's a little bit of an interlude, and in comes Kalev, right? It's somebody's, there's a new elect, and somebody says, I've always been wanting to make this development, and I just thought that now that I voted for you, if you wouldn't mind just, writing in. It's that's not nice. So what's going on over here? So there's a few explanations as to why it happens now. Maybe you should have waited till the end. Maybe he was concerned if you waited till the end. Why is this happening now? So one answer is that if you go back to the pasuk we looked in Parshas Pinchas, when it describes the procedure of division of the land, it says, Ach v'goral teichaleka aretz. But by the lottery, the land shall be divided. Now, every word in the Torah is obviously you have to be sensitive to. The word ach means but used in a sentence, you don't start with a sentence with a but, right? That's So what does it mean? But it means that's an exclusion. Rashi comments that Yeitzu Yehoshua Kalev. There were people who got land division who were not under the system of lottery. One of them being Kalev, because he got based on what he deserved, not based on the hand that was going into the box, right? Or the divine right, which means that your Kalev is saying is, before you begin the process of Goral, which is what the Torah describes, I'm outside of that system, so let's figure this out before we start, and then Troch Zayin Gesund, and let's go and divide up the lottery. Phenomenal. That's what's being said over here, which is how Rashi explains this. But it's a little deeper than this as well. I was reading through a sefer, which is, it looks like the last page didn't come up in the sources. Let me just see if it came up in yours. Yes, let's just see. You do. Oh no, do you have a back? Oh, you do have a back. Yes, okay, yeah. So look at the top of the page. I'm not going to read it inside, but there's this beautiful sefer written by Rav Reimer from Beit El, and he makes the observation is that this is exactly what Kalev did himself. Meaning here we have the Meraglim come back, they make the report, everybody's about to just start cry, Vayas Kalev Esa'am. And then Kalev jumps in, right? He's first in defense. Yehoshua comes in afterwards. Moshe and Yehoshua, they make the defense afterwards. The first person to make the defense is Kalev. So therefore, in a certain sense, he's also the first person who deserves the rights of the land of Israel, because he was saving the day then, and he deserves to go first as well. So there's a larger arc, we'll call it divine justice, which is being made over here. And it should not be lost upon us, the reunion moment right now between these two brothers. Because Yehoshua and Kalev were the two defendants of the land. And before everybody else, all the new generation and all those people who were born after them come in, they were the two survivors who were men between the age of 20 and 60 who survived. They were the only two men to survive this. And now in this beautiful unification, it's the two spies again coming back to the land, now talking about this, their old escapades in a certain sense of defending of the land, which is coming to full fruition. Let's close the perek with two more points over here. You'll notice at the end of the perek it describes that there was Kiryas Arba, and there was the name of a giant, right? And so just by the way, in today's day and age, if you go to visit Hebron, there's a very large yishuv, there's a large Jewish city which is outside Hebron called Kiryas Arba, based on this pasuk, right? And they call Kiryas Arba as such. It really touches Hebron. What the Radak says is that Kiryas Arba was the name of the giant, right? His name was Kiryas Arba. Some say that there were 4 giants that there. There were different Yelidei Anak who lived there, and that's why they're called 4. Kiryas Arba, the area of the 4. However, Rashi gives us a very interesting insight, which is a medrash, but he adds one little interesting nuance in Source 17. The medrash Adam HaGadol Ba'anakim, who Avram Avinu. Who was the giant? Why do we need to know about who lived there and how high they were? He says it's referring to the spiritual giant Avram, who shegaram lahem sha'aretz shakta mimilchama 40 shana shnis'akva b'midbar b'schar shekovdu esasakim kiryas arba she'amru lo nasi elakim ata b'sachenu. So here's his argument. Listen to Rashi's argument. Is that Hebron is actually at this point in time one of the only areas in Israel which has been bought from the Canaanites by a Semite. Right? How do we know? Because in Parshas Chayesara, Avinu, in good money, in public standing, buys that land. If he buys that land, he was seen as the Bnei Ches, the Hittites said to him, they had so much respect for him. Kalev is trying to re-ascertain his right because of the title deed of that property. Unlike the rest, there's going to be conquest. And so what's being said over here is, you know something interesting, and nobody ever points out this question, Rashi is addressing it, is the nation of Israel make a few attempts to get into the land of Israel, and they fail at the beginning of the 40 years. There's the Ma'apilim and so on. But then they're kind of moving around the desert, and none of the Canaanites bother them. None of the Canaanites bother this Bedouin tribe. You would have thought that if they are concerned about this promise from Exodus, that there's going to be this land and Abraham's coming back, the best thing to do is kill it, nip it in the bud, right? So wipe them out in the desert. Why did they wipe them out in the desert? The answer is because they recognize Avraham Avinu as being special in Hebron, which is why he was the Yelidei HaAnak. He was the child of the giants, right? Because of his name. Oh, it's his children, it's the Abraham children, we'll let them live. Which gave them the opportunity of being the ones to actually take the first step as well. Otherwise, why shouldn't they just send them out in the desert? They don't have any fortresses, they don't have any defense. Kill them then. But the 40 years of the desert, they were protected because of Avraham Avinu. And the last words of our chapter is, which is very fascinating, it's put over here, is Va'oretz shakta b'milchama. The land was silent from milchama. The way Rashi reads that is that it was the 40 years of the desert. Right? That means, but technically speaking, it probably means that this was the end of the war after 7 years. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? The Radak says, not such a good thing. They should have done more now. On the state level, rather on the tribal level, they should have done more. We saw this. So this is seen as a slight critique. I would just make the observation, and that is how did Kalevs' speech begin? What did he do? Vayas Kalevs ha'am. Kalevs silences the people. I think it's fascinating as a dramatic echo is that when he gets his property, when he gets the land of Hebron, full circle, Vayas Kalevs ha'am, the land becomes quiet. I think the reason why the Tanakh tells us this over here is that somehow when the full circle is made, when this man who defended the land of Israel gets the territory he was promised, that silence now resounds, and yes, there is a shadow to it. I understand that. But in the meantime, this is now a period of plenty and a period of peace, which is going to allow us to do the full division as well. So what seems to be like a very simple chapter with a few details, really a lot over here. It's only 15